But my name is Cassie Skaliski, and this is my last mental health minute, unless you have ideas for anything, or any requests for future mental health minutes. This will be my last one. I believe Terry might have one more, but I'm not sure if it's the last one for our entire group or just for me. So I've really enjoyed doing these, and I hope you've enjoyed them too, and hope that there's been times where you pick things up and have little nuggets and aha moments that you get to take with you into your life. So today we're going to talk about change and why we don't like it, what kind of changes happen in our lives, and kind of to process through and organize things so we can be better at accepting change and processing change when it does happen. So why don't we like change in general? Change generally means that there is a loss. So if you break it down to the basic nuts and bolts of what's happening when we have any type of change in our life, whether it's a good change that we see as really positive and we're excited about, or whether it's something we didn't know was going to happen and it just, suddenly we're going through this major change and we have no control over it, there is a loss of something. And that is always, for humans, that is something that we struggle with because we're creatures of habit. So when we have a loss of something, it creates some instability in our lives, and we don't like that. Another reason is that we have fear of the unknown. We don't know maybe what's going to happen in the future. We maybe don't know how things are going to be different for us or how people around us are going to react. We may not know how long it will be until we've accepted, this new normal, whatever it might be, a new job, a new home, a loss of a loved one, a new family member joining your family. We have to understand that we usually have fear of what is unknown. And then finally, humans are self-aware, and therefore we're self-centered. And so when change occurs, the way we identify ourselves may also be part of the change that's occurring. And so then we have that loss of identity or change in identity. It really comes in strong when it comes to our families and our jobs, or what we have as a career. When that changes, that tends to be one of those really difficult changes, even if it's something positive, because it's your identity. And so when you can find something a way to identify yourself that is more constant and less likely to change, then you don't have quite as much anxiety or fear when it does come time to change, or when there is a loss or a big change that you're not in charge of. An example I'm going to give for that is your faith. So if you identify yourself as a person of a specific faith, that's something that can't easily be taken away from you by external forces. Identifying yourself as a wife or a husband, identifying yourself as a parent or child or sibling, unfortunately can be taken away. And that can cause a lot of emotional dissonance and make change very difficult. But if you identify yourself as a person of what your faith is, first and foremost, then when that change occurs, you still have that main identity. And so faith is a very big, a person's faith in anything is a good indicator of how they will accept change, because that's their identity. So if you lose a job or something like that. Now, people who don't have faith, that does not mean that they are not going to be able to work through change well, because a lot of people don't prescribe to a specific faith, and are very good at going through changes and processing hard times. If they just do it differently than those who do have faith. So I'm going to move over to sharing my screen because I created this chart, and it's basically, I call it an intersect because it will show different types of change and then different ways people work through change and process things, and then kind of how the positives and negatives for that, and kind of a target for where we want to be. So does anybody have anything they'd like to say or add, or questions regarding what we just, like, little introduction there? No. Okay. I will move on then. Oh, things are moving around on my screen. All right. Is everybody able to see my, whoops, sorry, I moved that. There we go. Is everybody able to see this, the chart I have? And is it readable?
I can see it, but it is a little small.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
same here.
okay, so what I'll do is when I'm discussing a specific box, I will zoom in on that. And we'll do it that way. I kind of thought that's what I would have to do, but I wasn't sure. So, but to start off, can you see my cursor as well, where my arrow is? Yeah, okay. So this top row here, this is different types of change. And when we have control of events, no control over events, or partial control over events, our responses to change and the way we go through it is going to be different. And so generally in life, when change comes, you're going to fit into one of these categories. Sometimes we have full control over everything that's happening, and sometimes we don't, and sometimes it's kind of in the middle. Then along this side here, along the left side, this is how, in general, a person will prescribe to the change or will process the change. And this is something that we have full control over, but we tend to fall into the same box or the same category each time. So if you have a rational approach to change, you're going to use facts and historical data to work through. So you're going to constantly be that person who's rationalizing things and making plans and checkbox and those things. Next is going to be a mix of rational and emotional approaches. And then on the bottom, it's strictly, you go with emotions and intuition. So I'm sure you've all seen charts like this where you kind of follow the top and the side, and you land in the box where you belong, and that kind of shows your reactions, or whatever the process is, almost like a finding 2 points on a graph. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Whoops, not turn it. That was great. All right. So I think I would like to actually start with where we do not have control of events, because I think those changes are the ones that give us the most anxiety. I know they give me the most anxiety. If I have control over things, I have a lot, my worries are a lot less, and I enjoy change more. Are you able to see this better now, or should I make it bigger yet? That's good? Okay. All right, so when we do not have control over events, and we are a person who uses rational approaches, we may have some excitement about what's going on, but generally we're probably going to have some anxiety. And if our logic and reason don't line up with the people in charge, we're going to probably feel pretty frustrated and disenfranchised. We might end up really harming relationships when we're not in control and we know what's best, right? This, I think, this happens a lot with organizations that have a lot of hierarchy and decisions that are made for people who are like the frontline, quote unquote, like frontline workers, because, you know, a frontline worker knows what needs to be done and knows how things need to flow, and then some changes might come around, and it's very frustrating when you don't have say and you can't talk to the people at the top, right? This also happens when we have, you know, maybe my example that I experienced a lot when I worked in a NICU was when a family member would come in who was also a nurse or a doctor, and they didn't have any say in what was happening necessarily with their child, but they had all of this logic and data locked inside, and they weren't the one making the decisions, and that was really, really difficult for them. And so they get really, you know, frustrated and not be able to process what was going on, and pretty angry, maybe passive aggressive. Sometimes people going through this might sabotage the process. And then with this, positive outcomes are generally celebrated, of course, and then negative outcomes tend to be blamed on those in charge. So you get the "see, I told you so." So that is if you have no control over the events and you are extremely rational with your approach. I'm going to scroll down a little bit now, and we're going to talk about when you're extremely emotional with your approaches, when we have change coming towards us and no control. So you're going to have people who have a really high range of emotions and fear, dread, maybe some excitement for what the change is, if it's something positive. But when you have the lack of rational thinking, and you are completely out of control, there's going to be a lot of emotional dysregulation there, and displacing frustrations about what's going on, unpredictable emotions. Those things might really harm relationships. And so with this, you know, there's many people that I'm going to go back to the NICU experiences. Many people parents that I worked with in the NICU were under a lot of stress and just weren't and didn't understand the medical field and things like that were happening, and had a lot of these major emotions. And so, you know, positive outcomes were celebrated as successes, and the negative ones were blamed on those in charge. They actually had a lot of difficult relationships, like the parents with each other, because they were so emotional all the time. And, you know, friends, there was a lot of parents that I would see that would lose friendships just because they were kind of constantly all over and didn't have like a good handle on their emotions and their reactions. So where our goal, what we want to be, is a good mix of our rational and emotional approaches. And you're going to see this is definitely a pattern, always having a good mix, because you're going to be able to process your frustrations about having lack of control, and you're going to celebrate the positives, and you're going to be able to process the negatives, and then you're going to be able to learn from and take your experiences forward. So that is kind of our goal when we don't have control. I do have another slide after this that I want to get to as well, so I'm going to kind of move through a little bit quicker for the other sections, but it gives us some pointers for how to do these things and how to move forward. So now when we have full control of events, okay, so if we're only using a rational approach and we have full control of the events, there's possibly going to be excitement, definitely no anxiety, because you know you've rationalized everything to a T. You're going to be extremely task and result focused, which can be good, but other people's needs and feelings are not necessarily considered. Successes and failures are analyzed to the T, and support is not given to those who are impacted negatively. And so If you are a leader in this change and you don't have the empathy that you need to, to help out with others who are supposed to be following you, you're kind of not a really good leader. And so you're going to probably really damage some relationships. Now, down on the opposite end, I think we've all had that leader on the top there where we're, is kind of the hard nose and just like, oh, impossible to really make happy and follow. Well, on the opposite end, it can be just as negative when the person who's in charge has, is completely idea focused, high range of emotions. Instead of being empathetic, is sympathetic to others. So then there's no boundaries. You can't execute. You aren't necessarily certain of what your role is when you're trying to follow somebody like that. And so when we're leaders and trying to lead change, this is also can be a really negative spot to be. I mean, people might at first really like to follow you as a leader because you're nice, people, you treat people well, but that at an extreme can really fall apart. So of course, where do we want to be? We want to be a mix of the rational and emotional approaches, right there in the middle again. So yes, you're going to use facts and data, but you're going to be able to prioritize and give empathy and support to other people. But you're also going to be able to have boundaries and a plan, and people are going to be able to trust and respect you a lot more. So where it gets a little bit hairy, I would say, is this partial control of events. So if you have, this kind of comes into maybe like a middle management position, or let's say, in your daily life and not necessarily when we're looking at work, maybe you have a surgery that's an elective surgery. Say you're going to have a knee replacement, right? So you don't have control over a lot of it, but you have control over maybe your what's going to happen after, and you're going to do your therapy and those kind of things. So kind of keep in mind some type of situation where you have partial control of what's going on. So you might have some excitement, you might have some anxiety, you have the opportunity to be a really strong contributor. But if our ideas and logic or feelings, ideas or logic clash with the person who's in charge, we might try to take over. This could be damaging for relationships due to our lack of empathy. And successes and failures are really going to be analyzed, and there may be some blame if things don't really go well. Okay, then if we look down to the emotional approach, we have the exact opposite. There's going to be a high range of emotions, of course. Fear, dread, worry, maybe not trusting the person who's in charge, lack of rational thinking. Again, you're going to have that emotional dysregulation. Successes, now this is something really interesting. Successes with this are owned by the emotional person, but failures are displaced. So if something goes well, yeah, it's because I did that. But if something doesn't go well, it's leadership's fault, right? They screwed up. They didn't give me what I needed. Right? So you can see how this can be a really maybe kind of toxic. But of course, where do we want to be? Right in the middle, right? We want to be able to use our empathy to understand where leadership's coming from, or understand where our doctor's coming from, or understand, what's happening. But we also want to be able to have the logic and reason, and be able to follow those leaders. So positive outcomes are going to be celebrated, and this is our emotions, right? And negative outcomes are going to be processed, but this will happen without blame, and it will happen without necessarily trying to take all of the credit as well. And then lessons are going to be learned regardless of the outcomes. So I know this has lots and lots of words, and I want everybody to be able to have a copy of it in order to, you know, kind of be able to go over it on your own. But I also have this, there we go, a shorter version. And this kind of lets us know what, here we go. I think it's a little bit funnier actually, but kind of lets us know what people in our life look like. Not so many of the character or general characteristics of ourselves when we fit into these categories. So I'm going to go back to when we have no control over events. Okay, if we're completely rational people without any emotions or empathy, we're going to feel disenfranchised, frustrated. You hear about people going postal, getting really angry about things, and likely to give up. So what can we do when we're going through change? We can try to really build our advocacy skills to fight for what our needs are and what our wants might be, and build some empathy and listening skills so we can understand and trust the decision makers. I worked on this a lot with family members in the NICU, especially, like I said, those who had medical experiences in the past, to be able to feel that they could ask questions to the doctors and let them know what their concerns are, and be assertive, not aggressive. And it really did help a lot. Down with the fully emotional approach. Okay, these people, when we're here, we're a complete hot mess, right? You have no control over what's going on in your life, what these changes are, and you probably have no control over your emotions. And so, you know, think about if you are laid off, which happened to me not too long ago. At first, I was fully emotional. I will tell you that. I was a hot mess. People like this tend to create drama and are not able to move on and process. Luckily, I wasn't this hot mess for too long because I got control of myself a little bit. And when you learn why things are happening, learn as much. I'm kind of an information gatherer. Learn as much as you can about the situation that's happening and why the rules and regulations are there, or why things are happening. And then finding healthy coping skills to deal with your big feelings. Example, at first I was eating nothing but chocolate and coffee and drinking coffee, and like feeling sorry for myself for probably a good week and a half. And that was really not a good way to deal with big feelings of this change that happened to me that I had zero control over, right? I took control, I got a hold of my big feelings, and I started using positive coping skills. I put together a plan. I started looking for more work. I tried to be helpful to others that were going through the same thing as me. And I was able to move myself up into this wonderful space that we want to be, as our mix of rational and emotional approaches, right? So these people who are able to use this are generally have a good, strong mental health, right? They're mindful, open, and they're a good teammate. So this is where our target is, where we want to be. That's our target for when we're powerless, is right there. All right, so when I'm going to move back over here to people who have full control of events. Okay, they're highly productive, which is good if they're rational, but we can see them as maybe a dictator, hard-nosed. I've heard them called a blowhard before. They tend to be managers versus leaders, and you know, they get things done, but not necessarily in the best way, right? So I would recommend to increase empathy. Think about, you know, putting your walking in your the other people's shoes, and that will improve leadership skills and make changes easier for everybody. Down here at those people who are super duper emotional, that are visionaries, but they're super flighty and unstable and unpredictable. They tend to be a friend instead of a leader. Gaining some analytical perspective will help with execution, and people will trust you more and have more respect for you. And creating boundaries will also build that trust and respect. Sometimes we, especially, we're all women here, I believe. As women, boundaries tend to be something that we have a harder time with because we don't want people to think that we're, you know, that the nasty B word, right? It's not, that's not what actually happens. When we create boundaries and we are stable and have perspective and execution, we do it, people tend to respect us a lot more. So then here's our target for leaders. We want to be trustworthy, strong, open, mindful, and successful, right? Okay, and then this one is a little bit, you know, in the middle is a little bit, it's not as extreme with the positives and negatives. So when we have partial controls of events and we have a fully rational approach, our characteristics and actions really depend on the situation. So either it's hot or cold, either we're productive or we're toxic. And actually that's pretty much the same for fully emotional people, is depending on what's happening, we're either going to be toxic or productive. So again, bringing ourselves to the middle and increasing our empathy if we don't have any at that time, or learning why processes and rules are in place, getting some coping skills to deal with those big feelings, that's going to really benefit us as well. So I'm hoping that I think I have emails, or I can get these put up into our Teams meeting so you guys can have access to them. As far as people who are watching this recording, I believe that we'll be able to get you guys the these forms as well. Are there any questions? It is 12:30. Any questions or comments or anything else you'd like me to touch on?
This was really helpful, and thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I wonder too, is there a place like maybe somebody tends to be whatever category, but they have to work with somebody who's a complete opposite category, or they have a family member, right? So would this engender conflict sort of instantaneously? And what do you do? But I don't know. I'm just wondering.
So if we're able to get ourselves, I'm going to share quickly again. If we're able to get ourselves into this mix of rational and emotional, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was sharing. I'm not. Hold on. There we go. If we're able to get ourselves into this mix of the rational and emotional approaches, regardless of where we are as far as how much control we have, that will help our relationships with those people who are either strictly emotional or strictly rational. And I believe that, you know, we can't control how other people react to things, but we can control how we react. And sometimes that does seem to feel unfair, because you definitely have, like you said, the people who their emotional EQ or IQ, you know, their EQ is much lower, and they aren't able to see themselves in a mirror as well. But if we can maybe even in a roundabout way try to help present that to them, that maybe looking at things in a more factual way is going to help us a little bit right now, or maybe looking at things in somebody else's shoes is going to help us right now. But yeah, if you're somebody who is extremely rational and you're working with somebody who's extremely emotional, or vice versa, it can be really frustrated and just a huge disconnect. Absolutely. Anything else? Well, again, this was my last mental health minute, and I'm kind of sad about that, but unless anybody comes up with any ideas between now and when Project Renew is completed towards the end of this summer, I would be more than happy to do some research and put things together and present for you. So just let us know, and I wish everybody well and have a great rest of your day. Bye.